Welcome everyone to the Michigan State University Science Festival. And tonight I am joined by Christine McCreedy and Toby Voigt from the Michigan History Center, where they're going to explore aerodynamics and space age technology and car design for us. So you can really discover science at a history museum. So welcome.
Thank you, Roxanne. Hi, everybody. I am Christine. I'm an educator here at the Michigan History Center. And at the Michigan History Center, we share stories that foster curiosity, inspiration, and enjoyment. We're currently closed right now, but we hope to see you when it's safe to return. Today, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about airplanes and autos, and particularly the airplanes and autos 1950s Detroit style. This program is appropriate for everyone, and we have some activities that families can share. We'll demonstrate those, and families can share and do them at home. We're going to be talking about the science of flight. We'll talk about how auto manufacturers during the Second World War became very important in airplane design. And then we'll also talk about how those things shaped the cool cars of the 1950s, including the original Batman car. During our time together, I will ask you some questions, and you can either just shout them out at home, or you can use the Q&A bubble down at the bottom below. We'll be monitoring that, and if we don't get your question answered during the talk, we've got Roxanne who can help us and give us some questions at the end.
And if I can interrupt quickly,
Sure.
Forgot to mention that we're also live on Facebook. So for those folks on Facebook Live, if you have a question, you can put that in the comment section on Facebook Live.
Okay, so let's get started, and we're going to look at some airplanes and autos in the galleries of the Michigan History Center. This portion is pre-recorded, and I will be back after the video, and we'll continue forward and take questions. We'll wrap it up then.
The first thing I'd like you to do is to pretend that you're a World War II pilot. So let's get into our plane. We'll have to climb into our cockpit, sit into the cockpit, and we're going to put on our safety harness because we don't want to go flying around in the plane as we're doing our mission. Before you start the engine, I'd like you to imagine what you would like this plane to do. Think about it. I'll give you a second. I'm guessing that you said something like, you would want the plane to get off the ground quickly. You would want it to be able to go fast through the air, make quick turns, and land safely. Having a plane like that would help you accomplish your mission. Planes like the B-24 bomber behind me, made by the Ford Motor Company, and the F-86 fighter jet made by General Motors in California, helped the United States end both the Second World War and the Korean War. During the Second World War, the U.S. government and Ford built a factory called Willow Run outside of Detroit. This is a picture of the Willow Run plant right here with the B-24 bomber being built. A year after the B-24 bomber factory was opened, one bomber was being made every hour. 4,000 people worked at the factory, and over a 2-year period, they made 8,000 B-24s. During the war, people became really fascinated by the planes and what they could do. After the war, 1950s car makers in Detroit realized this, and they began to make cars that looked like they could do all the things that airplanes did. And they made some pretty cool cars. Before we look at cars, let's look at how airplanes are designed to take flight and go fast. Flight depends on 4 scientific forces that work together. Let's get out our airplanes. You got it? We're going to learn how these forces work together with our hand. These forces are lift, which moves things up, weight or gravity, which pulls things down, thrust, which pushes things forward, and drag, which pulls things back or prevents them from moving through the air. When all four forces are working together, this allows the plane to fly. In the 1950s, car makers began to incorporate the forces of thrust and drag into new car designs. Let's look at how thrust and drag work together. I'm going to use some simple household objects to demonstrate. We will put some links in the comment box to show you how you can do these demonstrations at home and even experiment a little bit. Thrust is created in a rocket or plane when air is pushed in the opposite direction of flight. So if we want our plane to go forward, which way does the air need to move? Yes, if my plane is moving this way, then the air needs to move in the opposite direction this way. We can demonstrate this with a balloon attached to a string. Air moving out of the back of the balloon creates the force that pushes the balloon forward. For large planes, air is drawn into the front of the jet engine and pushed out the back of the jet engine, which moves the plane forward. For our second demonstration, we've added a little something to the plane. When planes move forward through the air moving over the plane slows the plane down. This is known as drag. Airplane designers try to create smooth, curved shapes on their planes because air flows over curved shapes faster and easier than big, bulky shapes. Let's look at how our second plane that has been modified with the paper plate and see how far it goes. Which plane do you think traveled further? Here's our second plane that was modified, only halfway the length of the string. Our first plane with the smooth curved shape all the way to the end of our runway. During the Second World War, plane designers were always trying new designs to take advantage of thrust and drag. The designers were in awe of World War II aircraft, and they began to think of cars as airplanes for the road. One of the first cars to have an airplane-like look was the General Motors 1951 Buick Lesabre. It copied the look of the F-86 Sabrejet. The Lesabre had low, sleek wrap-around windshields and low seats that reminded people of a cockpit. It had a front-end grille that looked like a Sabrejet's engine and tail fins that even looked like wings. A few years later, when GM wanted to begin to sell a sports car, they included many of the same features of the Lesabre when they introduced the 1953 Corvette. What do you notice similar to the Buick Lesabre? The Corvette has headlights that extend into curved spines all the way to the back of the car, much like a fuselage on a plane. And we know from our discussion earlier what curved surfaces mean. They reduce drag. Car designers are always trying to balance thrust and drag of a car. When the 1953 Corvette was introduced, it looked cool and reminded people of the fast speeds of airplanes. To get even higher speeds out of the Corvette, GM also took advantage of a brand new material used for airplanes. They used fiberglass. The Corvette was one of the first cars to have an all fiberglass body. In 1955, Ford introduced an experimental car called the Futura. The car had a double dome plastic hood that resembled a jet cockpit, headlights that looked like jet engines, and tail fins that looked like they were airplane rudders. This car inspired a famous 1960 TV car. What do you think it was? I'll give you a hint. There's a plastic model right behind me. Think? You know what it is. Yes, the Batmobile. The Futura was never a car Ford made for purchase, but it inspired many designers to experiment. General Motors and Ford weren't the only car companies looking to the skies for design. In 1952, Chrysler wasn't just making cars, they were making rockets as well. During the 1950s, Chrysler built hundreds of rockets for the military and for space exploration. As a result, Chrysler cars began to have a look of a space-age rocket-like motion. Can you show me a rocket-like motion with your hand? Of course, it would go just like this. When a plane or a rocket uses its engines to move up, what is the force that pushes it? Yes, thrust. Car designers wanted car buyers to think of the power and motion of the rocket when they put tail fins on their new cars. The most popular of these cars was the 1957 Plymouth Fury. When you look at our Plymouth Fury in the Michigan History Center, you can see that it has extreme tail fins. These rocket-like tail fins have a look of power and motion. Between 1955 and 1964, tail fins were the car feature to have. By 1960, Americans weren't as enthusiastic about car fins anymore. Car manufacturers phased them out because they added unnecessary costs to the car.
Car manufacturers still continue to work on the science of thrust and drag. And let's just, before we go forward, let's think about all four forces of flight. So get out your plane again. Whoops, I'm going to have to put my plane this way. Get out your plane again. And I'm just going to move my hand, and you think about the four forces of flight. Think about, what is the force that moves the plane up? What is the force that moves the plane down or pulls it towards Earth? The force that moves something forward, and then the force that pushes something back or causes it not to move through air easily. Those four forces together allow a plane to fly. If you said lift is the force that pushes things up, weight or gravity pushes things down, thrust pushes things forward, and drag pulls things back. The two most important forces that we talked about that auto manufacturers used were thrust and drag. I'd like for you to think a second, if you were a car designer, what kinds of features, what would you modify on your car to increase thrust, but yet reduce the drag? If you can, maybe Roxanne can share some of those with us. If we put them in the chat box there, or the Q&A, excuse me, the Q&A box, tell us what you would put on your own car. I think on my car, I would put rounded surfaces for sure. And I particularly like the Corvette's rounded windshields. And even if you saw on the Futura, there was a round exhaust pipe at the back that looked a bit like a jet engine as well. Any answers about what you would put on your own car?
Not right now, but
Okay.
I think I would like to have a big tail on my car.
Yes. You probably would want one of those 1957 Furies. I know that's one of my favorite things in the museum for sure.
That's right.
Okay,
This
so
is Toby. I just pop in to say that I like the Corvette that's behind you. It's sleek,
yes,
and it's, subtle, but look at those nice curves that really help that airflow.
so we have a respondent in our Q&A, and they say they want those tail fins. And this person is identified as A. So A, I would encourage you, if you haven't, you might be a car buff, but if you haven't, to just Google tail fins and look at all of the extreme ones. In fact, the the put tail fins on cars was called the look forward. And there's an excellent video on the internet currently. So just Google look forward and you'll see a wonderful presentation about car fins and development during the 1950s and the early 1960s. Okay, so to conclude, the automotive, the airplane, and the rocket designers all sought to increase the thrust, but yet reduce the drag after the Second World War. And those designers really gave us some pretty cool cars in the 1950s. The designers captured our imaginations, and those designs from the 1950s, they still continue to influence car designers today. So we have a few examples of current car designs that were influenced by the thrust and drag and the thoughts of the 1950s. So the Black Panther car, which you see with the Black Panther symbol right there, is a Lexus 2018, a Lexus 500 2018. And then the other blue car on the bottom is this year's 2021 Stingray Corvette. And you can see that auto designers used those concepts of rounding off their edges to try and reduce the drag. So we're almost finished, but before we finish up, what I'd like you to do is, those of you that are out there in internet land, if you would please type one thing into our question and answer box that you learned today about airplanes or automobiles. I'll give you a few minutes and then hopefully we can read some of those out. Something that you learned about airplanes or automobiles today. This helps us at the Michigan History Center know how we can improve programs in the futures. Good. Cars were designed to look like planes. Exactly. The auto manufacturers knew the airplanes were a fascination, and they wanted you to think when you were buying a car in the 1950s that you were buying speed and luxury and technology.
Do you think in the design world, growing up, the Jetsons were a popular cartoon show and all their cars seemed to be almost circular as opposed to
They did, that large bubble. They wanted to reduce the drag, most definitely. I continuously thought of the Jetsons as I was preparing to share this information with all of you. Thank you, Skylar. Yes, thrust, gravity, and drag are also all very important so the plane can fly. Thank you very much for that response. So does anyone have any questions about anything that we talked about the development of the B-24 bomber during the Second World War, about how car designers transferred the information that they learned? All of this happening in Detroit.
We had a comment that A learned about the Futura, to go back to when you asked what people learned about. And then we had Aaron on Facebook say he learned about lift, gravity, thrust, and drag. So your points
Excellent.
made it across. Where were the B-52 bombers made in Detroit?
They were made at Willow Run outside of Detroit, essentially in Ypsilanti. So, and one of the very cool things, many people have heard of Rosie the Riveter. More than 15,000 women worked at the Willow Run plant using a tool that put the plane, parts of the plane together, and the small metal fastener was known as a rivet, and the women had guns and they would crawl on the top of planes and on the fuselage, which is actually the long part of the plane, which if you look at the Corvette behind me, the Corvette's headlights extend, that curved surface extends almost to the end of the Corvette. And that's mimicking that long portion of the airplane, the smooth surface again to reduce the drag. The women would climb up on top of the fuselage and put the rivets in to fasten that plane together. And when you get to come to the Michigan History Center and stand in our World War II gallery, you'll see that black and white photo of the Willow Run plant. And I challenge you, when you come, look for the women in that picture because they are there.
How long did they work after the war? Do you know, women?
I do not know that. That's an excellent question, really excellent question. I do know that historically women, when the men returned, the men went back into their traditional jobs. Women returned home. So women during the Second World War were very important in the workforce. The men were all away fighting in the war, and the women, and a few women did find themselves and said, hey, I want to stay in the workforce, and did that, but not many of them stayed at the Willow Run plant.
Oh, and we have a really important question. Where is this awesome museum? So where are you located?
We are located at 702 West Kalamazoo Street in downtown Lansing. Technology person, historian Toby, did I get that address right?
Oh, yep. Yes, you sure did. We are in downtown Lansing, nestled among the state buildings because we are a part of the state of Michigan. And our building's the coolest because we have a white pine growing out of the middle of the building. You'll have to come see it when we reopen.
And Toby, do we have a slide with some links on it of kind of cool activities families can do at home, things like the straw rocket? So hopefully we'll get those for you, and we can get those in Facebook so that you can go to the internet and know how to do. Oh, here comes Toby. Here you go. So you can try not only a balloon sort of plane experiment, but you can also try to build a balloon rocket car as well. And then there's also the straw, which is disappearing, the straw rocket that you can build. As I was preparing to do research on how the aerospace industry got involved with the automotive industry and how they influenced each other, I learned that was the first time I learned that Chrysler actually made rockets long into the 60s and a little bit in the early 70s. You can try those at home, and we encourage you to do that. Try them at home. We would love for you to film a video and post it on Facebook or Instagram and tag the Michigan History Center. So that's Michigan History Center, not Michigan History Museum, but Michigan History Center. And we can see what you have done with your own experiments and trying to increase your thrust and reduce your drag. Here's a challenge. If we were doing a balloon rocket, which we demonstrated, what actually produce the thrust in that rocket, and what would increase the thrust of that rocket as it traveled down a string? Does anybody have any, do we have participants that think they might know? Increasing the thrust is produced by the air you blow into the balloon. And so the more air you blow into the balloon, the greater your thrust you're going to have. And so there's all kinds of experiments you can do with that simple straw, string, and balloon to learn more about thrust and drag.
Have you ever created an experiment in water with the string and the balloon just to see which is faster, water or air?
No, we we haven't, but we had a participant earlier today tell us that the smooth curved shapes that we talked about reminded her of dolphins and how dolphins are shaped and how they move through the water. So that would be good to, yeah, I encourage you to experiment in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, I would, if you're doing this experiment in the water, drag would come into play quite a bit, wouldn't it?
That's what I would
Yeah.
think, yeah. So I wonder if boat design or submarine design also looks at some of the same principles.
Yep. We have a historian here who just retired who would have all those answers. His expertise was boats. So all those answers he would have.
And then we did have somebody answer your question about
Great.
what would increase thrust, and they were right. The balloon has
Yes.
more air. Yeah.
Good for you.
So.
Yeah.
So in the last few minutes, we only have about 4 minutes left. Can you tell us a little bit more about the museum and all the different things that you have there?
Well, like I
personally
said
love
in
it.
the introduction, we tell the big stories of Michigan here. So when you would be coming to, when you visit the museum, you will start along a historic timeline. A lot of you are probably familiar with timelines. You've probably made timelines. And you would start at the beginning of time during the Ice Age. You would move through early in Michigan before Europeans came. You would learn all about the Anishinaabe people. You would move through the lumbering era, the copper era. You would learn about being in a one-room schoolhouse in the 1850s. Then you would move through the 1900s, the 1920s, you would get to the Second World War, and you would end with not an era, but something that we all love to do here in Michigan, which is spending time outside. So thinking about our special resource that we have here and getting out with boating and snowmobiling and the uniqueness of our bridge. So you would come here and learn those very big stories. And then after you've learned the big stories, you can begin to think of how your ancestors would fit into one of those stories, or you might even want to know more about some of the people that you learn about in these big stories and how you might have responded during that time in history.
Nice. It's one of my favorite museums. I love visiting and can't wait for it to reopen again.
So,
yeah. When I was there, somebody was talking about where you were mentioning the white pine that grows in the middle of your building. And then they were talking about all the natural resources used to build the building and how Michigan made they were. And so I find that fascinating as well.
Yeah, Michigan is a very resource-based state, and we celebrate that when you come here. We celebrate all of our resources and all of our people. So we would love to have you back when it's safe, hopefully sometime after July. We don't know when, but we would love to see you all. If you see me here, say, hey, Christine, and I'll give you a challenge.
Nice.
I have a challenge for you. So when you come in, say hello.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I think we are out of time. I want to thank you both for being here and being part of the MSU Science Festival. I know we've partnered with the Michigan History Center for a number of years now, and we really appreciate the partnership. And for those of you that are out there viewing us, this is April 8th. We have events going on through April 30th. We have a big event on Saturday, our Expo Day, so check it out. And you'd mentioned going outside with our natural resources. We also have a citizen science challenge out there for our science festival goers to do what's called a bio blitz, where you go outside and take pictures and observe living things, and then you submit them on the iNaturalist app. So we're looking forward to seeing how many observations you all can make on our app. So again, thank you both for being part of the festival. We really appreciate it.
And thank you to all of our participants that dropped in today. I appreciate it. I'm glad you were here, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.